"You're under arrest." That's what two fake cops screamed at me as I floated my homemade boat on my very own ranch lake. The HOA Karen who sent them stood smirking from my driveway, thinking her little power play had worked. She thought she could scare an old veteran off his property with a couple of hired thugs and some phony badges. But while she was busy faking the law, she had no idea she had just declared war on a family that doesn't just follow the rules, they enforce them. When fake cops are at your door, and the law is a lie, how far would you go to protect your home? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below, because you're about to see a takedown of epic proportions. It was a perfect Tuesday morning, the kind you wish for when you're planning something special. The sun was just starting to warm the cool May air, and the surface of our little ranch lake was like a sheet of glass. For 6 months, I had been working on a project in my garage. Not a fancy speedboat or anything like that, just a small, flat-bottomed boat, something I'd built myself from plans I'd drawn on a piece of plywood. I used good cedar for the planks, sealed every seam twice, and gave it 3 coats of dark green paint. It was simple, sturdy, and all mine. At 68 years old, you find a lot of satisfaction in building something solid with your own 2 hands. After a lifetime of service and another decade working a civilian job, this was my retirement. This little boat, on this little lake, was my idea of peace. I wheeled it down to the water's edge on a small dolly I'd rigged up. The grass was still damp with dew. I could feel the eyes on me. In a community like this, anything out of the ordinary gets noticed. On one side, Marge Collins, a retired teacher and a good friend, gave me a cheerful wave from her kitchen window. On the other side, a curtain twitched in the Whitmore house. That would be Karen Whitmore, the president of our homeowners association. Her expression, visible for just a second, wasn't friendly. It was the look of a hawk spotting a field mouse. I ignored it. I had every right to be here. This was my property, my lake frontage. My deed said so. With a gentle push, the boat slid off the dolly and into the water. It floated perfectly. I felt a surge of pride, the quiet joy of a job well done. I grabbed my paddle, stepped in carefully, and pushed off. The boat glided out onto the glassy water, silent as a whisper. For about 20 minutes, it was bliss. Just the sound of the paddle dipping in the water, the chirping of birds in the trees, and the warmth of the sun on my back. This was why we'd moved here. It was exactly the kind of calm I had worked my whole life for. Then, when I returned to my little dock, I saw it. Tucked into the handle of my back door was a crisp, cream-colored envelope with the HOA's fancy logo embossed on the top. My stomach tightened. Nothing good ever came in an envelope like that. I opened it right there on the lawn. The paper was thick, expensive. The words were formal and cold. "Dear Mr. Mercer," it began, "it has come to our attention that an unapproved and unregistered watercraft has been launched into the community lake from your property. This is in direct violation of HOA Bylaw 7, Section C, which prohibits private vessels that have not met the community's safety and registration standards. You are hereby ordered to remove the vessel immediately. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $250 per day." It was signed with a flourish by Karen Whitmore. Unregistered watercraft? This was a 12-foot boat I built in my garage, meant for a lake no bigger than a puddle. What registration was she even talking about? I felt the anger start to build, a hot feeling in my chest. But I've learned over the years that anger is a useless tool. It clouds your thinking. I took a deep breath, went inside, and got my phone. I laid the letter flat on my kitchen table and took a clear photo. I took a photo of the envelope. I walked back outside and took a video of my boat, floating peacefully by my dock. I made sure the date and time stamp were visible. I started a new folder on my computer. I labeled it HOA, Boat Issue. Every piece of paper, every email, every photo went into that folder. If there's one thing I know, it's that documentation is power. Later that afternoon, Marge came over, holding a plate of cookies. She'd seen the envelope. "Don't let her get to you, Jack," she said, her voice kind. "That woman lives to make rules." I showed her the letter. She read it, her brow furrowing. "Bylaw 7, Section C? That's the one about not leaving trash cans out past noon. I was on the committee that wrote it. It has nothing to do with boats." That's when the first alarm bell went off in my head. This wasn't just a misinterpretation of the rules. This was a lie. "She also mentions registration standards," I said. "Does the HOA have a boat registry?" Marge shook her head. "Never. Not in the 30 years I've lived here." "Jack, this sounds fishy. You know, the county technically manages the waterways even in private communities like ours. The HOA doesn't own the water itself. Maybe you should give the county clerk a call. I bet they've never heard of any HOA boat registration." A small flicker of hope started. Marge was smart. If the HOA was making up rules, then this whole thing could be shut down quickly. Maybe it was just a simple case of overreach from a power-hungry board president. I felt myself breathe a little easier. I had a path forward. I would check the official county rules, find out my rights, and present the facts. It was a clear, logical plan. I thought this would be a simple dispute, a battle of paperwork. I had no idea that Karen Whitmore wasn't just armed with lies. I didn't know she was willing to escalate this from a simple letter to a full-blown war on my own front lawn. I thought I was just defending my right to float my little boat. I was wrong. I was defending my home from a level of malice I hadn't seen since my days in uniform. The day after Marge's visit, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. Her advice was sound. Just after 9 in the morning, I called the county clerk's office. A friendly woman named Brenda answered, and I explained my situation simply. I asked if there was any county ordinance that required a private, non-motorized boat on a private lake to be registered. Brenda was patient and thorough. She put me on hold for about 5 minutes to check the records. When she came back, her answer was exactly what I had hoped for. "No, sir," she said clearly. "There's absolutely nothing on the books like that. The county doesn't regulate small crafts on private property. As long as it doesn't have a motor, you don't need to register it with anyone." I thanked her, wrote down her name, the date, and the time of our call in my logbook. This was the proof I needed. It was simple, official, and undeniable. Karen Whitmore had lied. Plain and simple. I planned to draft a polite, firm letter back to the HOA, quoting my conversation with the county clerk. I would attach a copy of the bylaw Marge had mentioned, showing it had nothing to do with boats. I figured that would be the end of it. A bully backs down when confronted with facts. I was just starting to type up the letter when a loud, aggressive knock rattled my front door. It wasn't the knock of a neighbor or a delivery driver. It was 3 hard thumps, the kind meant to intimidate. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 men standing on my porch. They were both big, dressed in dark blue uniforms that looked vaguely official. They wore hats pulled down low, and their faces were set in grim expressions. My gut clenched. This was wrong. I opened the door, just a crack, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The taller of the 2 men, a guy with a thick neck and a mean-looking scar on his cheek, pointed a thumb at himself. "County enforcement," he grunted. "We're here about the boat." His partner, shorter but wider, stood with his arms crossed, trying to look imposing. He didn't say a word. I looked closer at their uniforms. They weren't quite right. The patches on their sleeves were generic, just a gold eagle that looked cheap. Their badges were shiny, but they didn't have the weight or detail of a real law enforcement badge. They looked like something you could buy online. "County enforcement?" I repeated calmly. "I'm not familiar with that department. Do you have identification?" The tall one scoffed. "We're here on an official HOA complaint, trespassing on a restricted waterway." "You're Jack Mercer?" "I am," I said. "And I'll ask you again for your identification and your badge numbers." He took a step forward, putting his face closer to the door. Listen, old man. We don't have time for this. Karen Whitmore filed a complaint. We're here to escort you and your property off the lake premises. Now, are you going to comply? Or do we have to do this the hard way? That's when I knew for sure. No real cop would ever call a citizen an old man or talk about the hard way over a boating complaint. And they would never, ever refuse to show a badge. Behind them, I saw her. Karen Whitmore was standing on her own lawn, phone to her ear, pretending to be on a call but watching every second with a smug, triumphant look on her face. She was staging this whole thing. I am not going anywhere, I said, my voice dropping lower. And you are not real police officers. The man's face turned red. We have the authority to place you under arrest for non-compliance. I almost laughed. It was such a ridiculous phrase. Okay, then do it, I said, unlatching the chain and opening the door fully. I stepped out onto the porch, holding my own phone. But first, I'm making a call. I dialed 911. I didn't say a word to the two thugs. I just put the phone to my ear. The operator answered immediately. 911. What's your emergency? Hello? I said, speaking slowly and clearly, so the two men and Karen could hear me. My name is Jack Mercer. My address is 124 Willow Creek Lane. There are two men on my porch claiming to be law enforcement, but they've refused to identify themselves. I'd like to confirm if you've dispatched any officers to my address. The two men exchanged a nervous look. The tall one started to bluster. Hey, what do you think you're doing? You're interfering with. Be quiet, I said, not taking my eyes off him. I'm on the phone with actual police. The operator was professional. Sir, can you describe the men? I described them perfectly. Their height, their clothes, their fake-looking badges. The operator put me on hold for less than 30 seconds. Sir, she said, her voice now sharp and serious, we have no officers dispatched to your location. I am sending a patrol car to you immediately. Please stay on the line with me if you can do so safely. I clicked the phone to speaker mode. Did you hear that? I asked the two men. Real police are on their way. Now might be a good time for you to explain who you really are. The color drained from their faces. The short one started backing away. Look, man, we were just... But I wasn't talking to them anymore. I was looking straight across the lawn at Karen Whitmore, whose smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure panic. She started walking quickly back toward her house. Ma'am, I called out, my voice carrying across the quiet street. You might want to stick around. I have a feeling the real police will want to talk to you about filing a false report and about hiring these two to impersonate officers. That's a felony, you know. The two men were gone, practically sprinting to a beat-up sedan parked down the street. I stayed on the phone until I saw a real patrol car turn the corner, its lights flashing. As the real officers approached, a cold realization settled over me. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant with a clipboard. She was a criminal. She was willing to break serious laws to get her way. This wasn't about a boat anymore. It wasn't about a made-up bylaw. This was about power, intimidation, and a woman who thought she was above the law. I also realized something else. She picked the wrong house to mess with. She had no idea who my family was. My brother, my sons, my daughter, they had all dedicated their lives to federal law enforcement. We know what evidence looks like. We know how to build a case. And as I gave my statement to the two polite, professional police officers, I understood that this was no longer a disagreement. This was a war, and Karen Whitmore had just given me all the ammunition I would ever need. The real police were professional and took my statement seriously. They documented everything, from the fake uniforms to Karen's hasty retreat. When they left, the quiet that settled over my house felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the calm before a storm. I knew Karen wouldn't just give up. People like her don't admit when they're wrong. They double down. My time in the service taught me that you don't win a fight by reacting. You win by planning, by gathering intelligence, and by choosing your battlefield. My kitchen table became my command center. The first thing I did was formally request, via certified mail, the last 6 months of HOA board meeting minutes. Every homeowner has a right to them, and I wanted to see what was being discussed, and more importantly, what wasn't. While I waited for those, I started digging into the documents I already had. That first warning letter, the one citing Bylaw 7, Section C, I laid it out next to a copy of the official HOA bylaws I'd received when I bought the house. Just as Marge had said, Section C was about trash cans. The letter was a fabrication, using a real bylaw number but attaching a fake rule to it. This was my first concrete piece of evidence. This wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate lie. I put both documents in a clear plastic sleeve and labeled it Exhibit A. Next, I needed an expert eye. I called my old friend Tom Avery. Tom spent 40 years as an electrical engineer, and his mind is a machine built for spotting flaws. He's gruff and doesn't waste words, but if you need to find the one weak link in a chain, Tom's your man. I drove over to his house, which is more of a workshop with a bed in it. He cleared a space on a table covered in blueprints and half-finished projects. "Let me see what you've got, Jack," he said, pulling a large magnifying glass and a high-intensity lamp closer. I handed him the letter. He studied it for a full minute in silence, then grunted. "Okay, first thing," he said, pointing at the signature. "You have another example of her signature? A real one?" I had an old welcome letter she'd signed when we first moved in. I handed it to him. He put them side by side under the light. "Look here," he said, tracing the K in Karen with his finger. "On your welcome letter, the K is sharp. 2 straight lines, an upstroke and a downstroke. Aggressive. Now look at the K on this warning. See how the top part is looped? It's a small difference, but it's a difference in habit. Someone tried to copy her signature, but they weren't used to making it." He then pointed to the HOA seal at the bottom. It was just a red circle of ink. "This is junk," he said flatly. "A real official stamp or seal presses into the paper. It's called an embossment. You can feel it with your finger. This is just a cheap rubber stamp. Anyone could buy it online." We spent the next hour going over every piece of paper the HOA had ever sent me. We found 2 other notices from the past year. One fining me $50 for my grass being a half-inch too long, and another for a non-conforming mailbox that had the same forged signature and fake stamp. I had paid those fines just to avoid the headache. I felt a hot flash of anger at myself for not looking closer then. The total came to $175. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was the principle. It was theft by deception. Tom wrote up a simple 1-page report detailing his findings, written in plain language a child could understand. He concluded, "The documents reviewed show significant evidence of signature forgery and the use of a non-official stamp." I labeled his report Exhibit B. My next step was building a timeline. On a large whiteboard in my garage, I started writing down every event, every interaction, every piece of evidence, with a date and time. May 10th, 10:00 a.m., boat launched. May 10th, 11:30 a.m., fraudulent HOA letter received. May 11th, 9:15 a.m., phone call to County Clerk Brenda, confirming no registration required. May 11th, 2:00 p.m., confrontation with fake police impersonators. Police report number 8675309 filed. The board meeting minutes arrived a few days later. I read through every page. There was absolutely no mention of any new rules about boats. There was no discussion, no vote, nothing. This proved the HOA board itself had not authorized Karen's actions. This was a rogue operation. A small victory came in the form of my neighbors. Marge started talking to people. Slowly, Others came forward with their own stories. One man was fined for planting a rosebush that was the wrong shade of red. A young couple was threatened with a lien on their house because their toddler's plastic slide was visible from the street. They all had the same pattern: a threatening letter, a questionable bylaw, and Karen's forged signature. Their fear of her was slowly being replaced by a shared anger. They started making copies of their own documents and dropping them in my mailbox. The HOA board members were starting to look nervous. I saw one of them, Linda Graves, at the grocery store. She was a younger woman who always seemed overwhelmed. When she saw me, her eyes widened and she immediately turned her cart down another aisle to avoid me. They knew something was wrong. They were complicit in their silence, and they were scared of what was coming. I organized everything into a heavy 3-ring binder. Every email was printed, every photo was dated, every neighbor's testimony was logged. Tom's report was the centerpiece. My conversation with the county was noted. This binder was no longer just about a boat. It was a clear, undeniable story of fraud and intimidation. I hadn't even had to raise my voice. I was just gathering the receipts, one by one. And the pile was getting heavy. With my binder of evidence ready, I felt like I was finally on the offensive. I had facts, I had proof, and I had the law on my side. But I underestimated Karen Whitmore. She wasn't an opponent who waited to be attacked. She believed the best defense was a relentless, overwhelming assault. The day after I started compiling neighbor testimonies, the official-looking letters started coming again. This time, they were delivered by courier, a deliberate tactic to make them seem more severe. First, there was a new fine for the boat, backdated to the day I launched it, totaling over $1,000. Then came another fine, this one for $100, for unauthorized property modification. The modification? I had installed a new security camera over my garage after the incident with the fake cops. The letter claimed it violated the community's aesthetic code. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. I was being fined for the very camera that was protecting me from her harassment. I photographed each letter, dated them, and slipped them into the binder. I sent a simple, registered letter back to the board, stating that all fines were being disputed based on evidence of fraud, and that I would not be paying them. That's when Karen escalated from paper to people. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was in my garage, sanding a piece of wood for a new birdhouse. A heavy-duty work truck, the kind contractors use, pulled up and parked directly in front of my driveway, blocking my car in. A big man in a dirty t-shirt and work boots got out and stomped up to my front door. He didn't knock. He pounded his fist on the door hard enough to shake the frame. I walked out of the garage and stood in the driveway. "Can I help you?" I asked. He turned, a scowl on his face. "You, Mercer? Karen sent me. Got a work order for an immediate safety inspection of your exterior, electrical, and water hookups." He held up a crumpled piece of paper that looked like a grocery list. "Says here you got unapproved wiring." "There's nothing wrong with my wiring," I said calmly, "and I haven't authorized any inspection. You're on private property." "Got my orders," he grunted, taking a step toward my side gate. "Gotta check the meters. Takes 5 minutes." "No," I said, standing in his way. "You're not going anywhere on my property without a court order or a properly scheduled appointment with me. You have neither. I suggest you get back in your truck and leave." I pointed up at the new camera he was supposedly there to find me for. A small red light was blinking. And just so you know, this entire conversation is being recorded. The man's demeanor changed instantly. The bully act melted away, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He looked from the camera to me, then back to his truck. "Whatever, man," he mumbled. And without another word, he got back in his truck and drove away. Not 2 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Marge. "Jack, I saw that whole thing from my window. That man was talking to Karen at the end of the street, right before he came to your house." My front door camera caught the whole thing. Audio and everything. My heart beat a little faster. "Can you send me the file, Marge?" "Already on its way," she said. The video was crystal clear. It showed Karen handing the man a piece of paper and pointing at my house. The audio was even better. You could hear her saying, "Just tell him it's a mandatory safety check. Be firm. He has to let you in. Find something, anything, you can write up." This was it. This was the smoking gun. This was proof of a conspiracy to commit trespass and harassment. That evening, I drafted an email. I attached the video file Marge had sent me, along with a still photo of the man pounding on my door from my own camera. I sent it to every member of the HOA board, and I CC'd the officer who had taken my initial report about the fake cops. The email was short and to the point. Subject: Unlawful entry, attempt at 124 Willow Creek Lane. To the members of the HOA board, at approximately 2:15 p.m. today, an individual attempted to gain unauthorized access to my property under the false pretense of a safety inspection ordered by Karen Whitmore. The entire incident, including Ms. Whitmore instructing the individual, was recorded. Please find the video evidence attached. This is a formal notice to cease and desist all forms of harassment and intimidation immediately. A copy of this email and the attached evidence has been forwarded to the County Police Department to be added to my ongoing case file. I thought that would be the end of it. How could they possibly argue with video evidence? The next day, an email came back from the board. It wasn't an apology. It was a lie. It was signed by Karen. Email.7. It claimed the inspection was a necessary community safety measure in response to unverified electrical modifications, likely referring to my camera. It stated that my refusal to cooperate was a serious breach of my HOA agreement, and that the board was now considering all legal options to ensure the safety of the neighborhood. She was twisting my evidence against me. Frustrated, but not defeated, I picked up the phone. I called the local news station, the one with the investigative team that helped people fight back against scams and corporate bullies. I got a reporter named Sarah Jenkins on the line. I explained the situation calmly, from the boat to the fake cops to the video of Karen conspiring to trespass. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mr. Mercer, this is exactly the kind of story we look for. Can you send me that binder?" A surge of hope went through me. For the first time, it felt like this could end. 2 days after I sent Sarah the evidence, I got a letter from the HOA's lawyer. The tone was completely different. It was professional, almost conciliatory. It said the board was taking my claims very seriously and was launching an internal review. In the meantime, all fines and pending actions would be suspended. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. It was working. The threat of public exposure was enough. They were backing down. The relief lasted for exactly 24 hours. The next morning, a professional courier knocked on my door. He handed me a thick, sealed envelope. Inside, on heavy legal paper, was a document that made my blood run cold. It was a formal notice of foreclosure proceedings. They were trying to take my house. I stood in my quiet hallway, holding the foreclosure notice. The paper felt heavy, important, but the words on it felt like a physical blow. Foreclosure. It's a word designed to create panic. For a moment, it worked. All the evidence, all the careful documentation, all the small victories, it all felt useless. She was attacking the roof over my head. For the first time in this whole ordeal, a cold knot of fear tightened in my gut. I had served my country for 30 years. I had worked hard, paid my taxes, saved my money. I built this life with my own 2 hands, and now, a woman with a grudge and a title was trying to burn it all down over a little wooden boat. This was the emotional low point. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, just staring at the document. It was a bluff. I knew it had to be. There was no legal basis for it. The fines were fraudulent. The process was a sham. But the threat was real. The legal fees to fight something like this could be crippling. That was her real weapon. Not the law, but the cost of justice. My friends started to worry. Tom called, his voice gruff but full of concern. "Don't let her get in your head, Jack. It's a scare tactic." Marge came over with a casserole, her face etched with worry. "People are getting scared, Jack," she admitted quietly. "A few of the neighbors who gave you statements, they're backing away. They got letters too. Smaller fines for things like weeds or holiday decorations left out too long. She's sending a message to everyone. Stay away from Jack Mercer." The community felt different. The friendly waves from neighbors were replaced with quick, nervous nods. People who used to stop and chat now hurried past, avoiding eye contact. Karen was poisoning the well, turning my home into an island. That's when the fake cops came back. It was just after dusk. I was sitting in my living room when the same beat-up sedan from before pulled up across the street. This time, they didn't come to my door. They just sat there, the two of them, watching my house. The intimidation was obvious. But this time, I wasn't the only one watching. I had given my family a full briefing on the situation. My oldest son, David, an FBI agent, had been particularly concerned. As I saw the car park, I made a call. I didn't call 911 this time. I called David. 10 minutes later, two clean, official-looking black sedans pulled up, silently boxing the thug's car in. Two men in sharp suits got out. One was my son, David. The other was my daughter, Emily, who works for the Marshal's service. They walked up to the driver's side window of the thug's car. I couldn't hear what they said, but I could see the effect. David and Emily were calm, professional, and radiating an authority the two hired goons could only dream of. Badges were shown. Real ones this time. The passenger door of the thug's car opened, and the shorter man got out, his hands in the air. Marge's security camera, pointed down the street, caught the whole thing. It also caught Karen Whitmore, who had been watching from her window, a look of pure shock on her face. Her hired muscle was being dismantled on the street by actual federal agents. She had tried to play with fire, and had just met the fire department. The local police arrived shortly after, and took the two men into custody. Impersonating an officer was one thing. Witness intimidation was another level entirely. It was a huge victory, but it came at a cost. The next day I found a plain manila envelope in my mailbox. There was no stamp, no return address. Inside was a stack of papers. It was a set of internal HOA emails, leaked anonymously. I read them, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The emails, mostly between Karen and the HOA's lawyer, laid out her personal vendetta against me. It started over a year ago, when I had publicly opposed her plan to spend $50,000 of HOA funds on a giant, ugly fountain for the community entrance. I had argued the money would be better spent repaving the roads. I won the vote. She had never forgiven me. The boat wasn't the issue. The issue was that I had challenged her authority. One email from Linda Graves, the quiet board member, stood out. It was a message to another board member. It said, "I can't do this anymore. What she is doing to Jack is wrong. She's forging documents. We could all go to jail." That was my whistleblower. Linda was scared, but her conscience was winning. Karen's world was starting to crumble, but she had one last, desperate card to play. A week later, another courier arrived. This time, it wasn't a foreclosure notice. It was a temporary restraining order. Karen had filed a sworn statement with the court, claiming I was harassing her, that she felt unsafe, that I was stalking her, and coordinating a neighborhood-wide campaign against her. It was a complete inversion of the truth. It was a masterpiece of victim playing. The order stipulated that I was not allowed within 100 yards of her, which effectively made me a prisoner in my own home, as she lived right across the street. I couldn't go to my mailbox. I couldn't work in my front yard. She had used the legal system itself to trap me. I looked at the order, then out the window at my little boat, still tied to the dock. This fight had taken everything from me. My peace, my money, my relationship with my neighbors, and now my freedom. For the first time, I felt a deep, profound exhaustion. I wondered if it was all worth it. The restraining order was a clever move. It used the law as a weapon to silence me. For 2 days, I followed it to the letter. I felt trapped. The anger and exhaustion warred within me. It felt like I was losing. That's when I had a family video call. My brother, my sons, David and Mark, and my daughter Emily. They all had that look on their faces, the one that meant they were done watching from the sidelines. "Dad, this has gone far enough," David said, his voice firm but calm. "She's not just breaking HOA rules anymore. She's committing multiple felonies. Witness intimidation, filing a false police report, and filing a fraudulent court document with that restraining order. It's time to stop defending and start prosecuting." Emily agreed. "We need a new strategy. Right now, you're just one man fighting a corrupt board. We need to make this a community issue. You need to give the other homeowners the tools to fight back with you." Mark, who works in forensic accounting for the Treasury, chimed in. "And you need to show them the money. Where do their fees go? Show them the fraudulent fines. Nothing motivates people like seeing their own money being stolen." That conversation was the turning point. It shifted my perspective. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an organizer. My family's combined knowledge was a powerful resource. We spent the next hour outlining a simple, step-by-step plan. The goal wasn't just to clear my name. It was to dismantle Karen's entire power structure. The first step was to arm my neighbors with information. With help from my kids, I created a simple one-page guide. We called it the Homeowner's Bill of Rights for our community. In plain, easy-to-understand language, it listed the actual HOA bylaws, the relevant county laws, and the state laws regarding HOA governance. It explained how to legally request financial documents, how to dispute a fine, and what constituted illegal harassment. There was no jargon, no complicated legal language, just simple facts. The second step was to present the evidence in a way no one could ignore. I had my big binder of proof, but a binder is a private thing. I needed to make it public. Tom Avery, my engineer friend, agreed to give a recorded statement. We set up a camera in his workshop, and he walked through the evidence of the forged documents, point by point. He explained how the fake stamps were different from real ones, showing close-up photos. He demonstrated the inconsistencies in the signatures. He explained it all with the calm, matter-of-fact authority of an expert witness. I took his video and edited it into a short, 5-minute presentation. The next community HOA meeting was in a week. It was usually a dull affair, held in the community clubhouse, with maybe a dozen people attending. This time would be different. Marge and I worked the phones. We didn't gossip or spread rumors. We simply told our neighbors that we had compiled a presentation of documented facts about the HOA's recent activities, and that we would be presenting it at the meeting. We emailed them the Bill of Rights guide in advance. The day of the meeting, the atmosphere in the clubhouse was electric. The room was packed. Over 100 homeowners were there, standing along the walls, spilling out into the hallway. They weren't an angry mob. They were an audience, waiting for a story. They all held a copy of the guide I had sent. Karen Whitmore sat at the front table with the other board members. When she saw the crowd, her face paled. She tried to start the meeting with the usual boring agenda. But a homeowner in the front row stood up. "With all due respect, Karen," he said, "I think we'd all like to hear what Jack Mercer has to say." The room erupted in applause. The other board members looked terrified. Linda Graves wouldn't even look up from the table. Karen had no choice. She had lost control of the room. I walked to the front, connected my laptop to the projector, and for the next 20 minutes, I laid out the facts. I didn't raise my voice. I just presented the evidence, piece by piece. I showed the timeline on the screen. I showed the fake letters next to the real bylaws. I showed the picture of the hired goon trying to force his way onto my property. Then, I played the video from Marge's camera. The room was dead silent as they heard Karen's own voice instructing the man to find something, anything, you can write up. I ended with Tom's video. His expert testimony destroying any shred of credibility the documents might have had. When the presentation was over, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, the questions started. Not for me, but for Karen. People stood up, holding their own fraudulent fine notices. Did you forge the signature on this, Karen? Where did the money for those fake cops come from? Will the board be refunding all of these illegal fines? Karen tried to answer, but her voice was shaking. She blustered about community safety and following procedures, but the words were empty. Nobody was buying it. Her power was evaporating before our very eyes. The final blow came from Linda Graves. She stood up, her hands trembling as she held a piece of paper. I can't be a part of this anymore, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The board never voted on any of these fines. We never approved the actions taken against Mr. Mercer. This was all Karen. I have the internal emails to prove it. And I am officially resigning from the board, effective immediately. That was it. The dam broke. 2 other board members resigned on the spot. Karen was left sitting there, alone, exposed. The meeting ended with a homeowner making a formal motion for an emergency vote of no confidence in Karen Whitmore, and for a full, independent audit of the HOA's finances. It passed unanimously. As people were filing out, many of them stopped to shake my hand, to thank me. They weren't afraid anymore. They were empowered. I had given them the tools, and they had taken their community back. But as I packed up my laptop, I saw Karen staring at me from across the room. The fear and shock on her face had been replaced by a look of pure, cold hatred. She walked up to me, her voice a low hiss. You think you've won, she said. This isn't over. I'll fight this. It wasn't a cliffhanger. It was a promise. I knew she was beaten, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. Karen's promise to fight back turned out to be nothing but hot air. In the weeks that followed her public humiliation, her empire didn't just crumble. It was systematically dismantled, piece by piece, not with anger, but with procedure. The vote of no confidence was held, and the result was overwhelming. She was officially removed as HOA president. The independent audit I had called for went forward, and it uncovered years of mismanagement and abuse. My son Mark, with his treasury background, provided the auditors with a checklist of things to look for. They found slush funds, no-bid contracts given to a friend's landscaping company, and, of course, a clear record of the fraudulent fines. Every dollar was accounted for. The local authorities, armed with my police report, the testimonies of the arrested thugs, and the evidence from my binder, officially charged Karen with filing a false police report and conspiracy to commit fraud. Faced with indisputable evidence and zero support, she took a plea deal. There was no dramatic courtroom battle. It was something far more satisfying, a quiet, administrative end to her reign of terror. 2 weeks later, another special community meeting was called. This one felt different. It wasn't tense, it was hopeful. The new interim HOA board, led by a retired accountant named George, started the meeting. Karen was there, but not at the front table. She sat in the back row, looking smaller, stripped of her power and authority. As the first order of business, George announced that the HOA, under legal advisement, was formally apologizing to me and every other homeowner who had been unjustly targeted. Then, he invited Karen to the microphone. She walked to the front of the room, her steps slow, her eyes fixed on the floor. She read from a prepared statement, her voice flat and emotionless. She apologized for her overzealous enforcement and for the misunderstandings that had occurred. It wasn't a sincere apology, but it didn't need to be. The real victory wasn't in her words, but in the act itself. The entire community was watching her, on camera, forced to admit defeat. When she finished, there was no applause, just a heavy, satisfying silence. Her power was gone, That was her real punishment. Justice came in the mail a month later. The county regulator, acting on the results of the audit and the police investigation, levied a significant fine against the HOA for its conduct. Part of the settlement required full financial restitution. A check arrived in my mailbox, issued by the HOA's insurance company. It was for $1,750. A note was attached, breaking it down. $175 for the fraudulent fines I had paid, and the rest for legal consultation fees I had incurred. But it wasn't just me. Every homeowner who had paid one of Karen's bogus fines received a reimbursement check. The total payout was over $10,000, money coming directly out of the HOA's operational budget, a painful reminder of the cost of corruption. The change in the community was immediate and profound. The new board, with Marge now serving as vice president, rewrote the rulebook. They instituted new transparency requirements. Every board meeting would now be live-streamed and recorded. All financial expenditures over $500 required a community vote. They created a simple, clear process for disputing fines, with an independent review committee made up of homeowners. The guide I had written, the Homeowners' Bill of Rights, was formally adopted as an official part of the HOA's welcome packet for new residents. It was shared widely online, and I started getting emails from people in other communities, asking for advice on how to deal with their own HOAs. My small fight had become a tool for others. A few months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, I finally wheeled my little green boat back down to the water's edge. This time, I wasn't alone. Marge brought over a pitcher of iced tea. Tom came by, and a few other neighbors I now knew by name pulled up lawn chairs. There were no twitching curtains, no glares of disapproval, just friendly smiles and quiet conversation. I pushed the boat into the calm, glassy water and stepped in. As I paddled out toward the middle of the lake, I looked back at my home, at the friends gathered on my lawn. The peace I felt was deeper and more satisfying than it had been on that first day. It was a peace I had fought for. It was a peace we had all earned together. I remembered something my father used to say when I was a boy, struggling to stack firewood against a sloped hill. I'd get frustrated as the logs kept rolling down. He'd just smile and say, "Son, you can't vote against gravity." It meant that some things are just fundamental truths. You can't bully your way past them. You can't lie your way around them. Sooner or later, reality will pull you back down to earth. Karen tried to vote against gravity, and in the end, gravity always wins.